like couldn't imagine my life with drugs anymore, and I couldn't imagine my life without drugs. And that was like an extremely scary, unknown place to be.
Welcome to the Sober Spill podcast. I'm your host, Isabel. On this podcast, we have real conversations with people in recovery, their families, and organizations that pertain to this field. Today, I'm here with the host of the clinical side of our podcast, Jana Wu.
Thank you, Isabel. My guests will discuss best clinical practices, new emerging trends in substance use and mental health disorders, and how we can best take care of ourselves and our loved ones in recovery.
See you every Thursday.
And come spill with us soon.
Hi, my name's Isabel, and welcome to the Sober Spill. Today I'm here with Cameron Breen, who is the Street Outreach Case Manager for Liberation Program. For the people that don't know you, outside of your professional title, who are you?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Cameron Breen. I work for Liberation Programs, as Isabel said, doing street outreach case management. So what that means is I work with individuals who are unsheltered, living on the street. I try to connect them to resources, treatment, housing, shelter, anything along those lines. I also operate and manage the drug checking program for Liberations, which is interesting, but I can get into that a little bit later. And I'm a person in long-term recovery. I have been sober since 2017, July of 2017. I am a music lover. I love spending time with friends. I love traveling. Who am I outside of all of those things?
What kind of music? What kind of music are you into?
I love like jam music and electronic music. I've been following a jam band around for the last 15 years. It kind of embarrasses me to say that, but
that's pretty, that's like pretty in line with a lot of people I know in recovery. They're like, I'm following Fish this year. And I'm like, what about a job, girl? Like, you got time for that?
I follow the Disco Biscuits around, so very similar to Fish, but a little bit less, a little more electronic, a little bit less jammy.
Okay. And then do you DJ? Because when I looked up your name, because I was just like looking into like what's up with this guy, and there's a DJ with your name. Is that you?
No, that's not me.
Okay, well you should maybe investigate him if you're into electronic music.
There's a DJ named Cameron Breen?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I never knew that.
I know, you might have someone impersonating you. So before we started filming, we learned that you grew up in adjacent towns. My town swim team had big beef with your town swim team because you guys were very good. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yeah, I was on the swim team when I was a kid.
Okay.
But I just the young girls would literally blow me out of the water, and so I just didn't continue to pursue swimming.
Yeah, that was your alcoholic ego before you picked up the first drink. It brought you great shame on your family's name.
I did it for years. I loved swimming, but I just they would do these competitions, and these like young girls would just literally blow me out of the water, and I was just like, this is not for me.
Was it the Sea Dogs?
Something like that.
Yeah, it was big. We were our town team, we were the Dolphins. And anytime we went against the Sea Dogs, it was a big thing. And then our really good swimmers would leave us for the Sea Dogs.
Even though it was like you guys lived in the same towns?
Yeah. Wow. That's why I'm putting aside like a lifetime of like beef. Like this is something I'll process with my sponsor later. But for now, like I feel like we've worked it out. Yeah. So you mentioned being in recovery. When did that start for you? And you talked a little bit earlier about being a mess in high school, which I very much identify with. Like, is this something that started young for you?
Yeah, I started using drugs when I was like 12 or 13, maybe even 11, and then throughout high school, like it just progressed to the normal story of pills, and but like high school was rough in this extent that like the thing that was my primary focus was drugs, you know.
And did people in the school know you as someone that was like using drugs or someone that struggled?
Yeah, I think it honestly gave me like I always sought connection. And so, like, being a kid who struggled with connection, struggled with my parents' divorce, struggled with all sorts of other things, I whatever it was, I found that connection like within substances. And it was like people who use substances being the person who was known as, you know what I mean? And then that progressing to like selling drugs and just consistently, constantly using drugs. So they definitely, pretty early on, I had that connotation, to be, a person who used drugs. And, like there's a funny story that goes along with it that like when I was in 7th grade, I thought it was a great idea to sell someone in my school basil and tell them it was weed.
You were an entrepreneur.
And tell them it was weed. And so I did that. Unfortunately, he went around the school and like held the bag of basil and was like, you know, like, oh, Cameron sold me weed. Cameron sold me weed. And then I proceeded to later on get pulled out by my ear by my guidance counselor down to the office, and the police came and they were like, you know, you're in a lot of trouble. You're selling drugs on school property. And I was being the, you know, the arrogant little kid that I was like, it's not weed. It's oregano from my mom's spice cabinet. And so from there on, I was, you know, I was like suspended from school. And then, you know, from there on, I was just known as that person.
I don't know if you identify with this at all, but I always find when I go back to my hometown as someone who very publicly had like the moniker of like, oh, she's super depressed, like visibly all through high school. I feel like weird when I go back to my hometown where I'm like, I'm sober now. Like anyone that's like identified me with who I was in high school, there's like a great shame, I feel.
I think that for me, that's to a certain degree past just because of like what I do with the work that I do. And then most people know like that I grew up with what I do. So, but there was a extended period of time where it was like I would go back home and just like be in the grocery store and be like, I hope nobody sees me, or, you know, what all of the shame and stigma that's just unfortunately attached with substance use.
I know, and it's so funny because it's, especially now we know like 1 in 3 people can be affected by substance use. Like everybody knows someone who's affected by it. It's so widespread and like non-discriminatory, but yeah, still I'm like, And then anytime I see someone on Facebook be like, I got my 24-hour chip from my town, I'm like, like you too. Yeah. And then it helps destigmatize that a little bit. But so you started using in high school. How old were you when you got sober?
I tried to get sober like a bunch of times because like by the time I was 18, I realized that I had like a pretty serious problem, and it was always like, I was never the kid that got away with it. I was always the kid that like got arrested. And a lot of times I would try to like appease the courts or the family or whatever, and like attempt to. And my first like bout in recovery was like partially, yes, I knew I had an issue and needed to get help. And the other part was like, if I don't do this, like I could go to jail, I could get in more trouble, etc. And so the first time I tried to enter recovery, I was like 18 and like, you know, did medication for opioid use disorder, or MAT as it was known at the time. I got on Suboxone. I had like about like probably close to like a year of recovery, and was going to like IOP. And I think they told me at the IOP that I went to that I was the youngest person that they had ever had at that time. I think it's now gone down to younger, but I think I was like 17 or 18. And then they were like bouts of recovery and insanity in between the years of 18 and 24. And then I've been sober, I think. It's weird how you lose track of it, you know?
Yeah. Like, I think I've been sober. Well, sometimes I think your brain can also be like,
yeah, like I know I've been sober for 8.5 years, but my brain is like, was I 24? Was I 25? Yeah. You know what I mean? And at one point in time, I don't know, it all feels, especially when you're like brand new in recovery, it all feels like so important, and that time has such a weight and all of that. And I don't know that I necessarily believe that these days, but
No, yeah, it's the amount of time, quantity doesn't equal quality. Certainly. And that's when I know certainly when I got sober because I was like I have to get sober before I'm 20 because if I can drink legally, that's going to be a problem for everybody around me and myself. I don't know if I'm going to make it that long, but so I got sober I think 10 days before I turned 20. I mean, there was a myriad of other circumstances too, obviously. I wasn't just like, "You know what? I'm done now." Like my brain didn't work that way. But yeah, it's so funny looking back. It's even like when you get a year and you're like, wow,
Yeah.
I'm set.
Yeah.
I'm good now. And then you learn that's very much not the case. And so what was like that moment of desperation? I guess what was different about this last time that you got sober then?
Between like 20, I managed to rack up 3 DUIs before the time that I was 24.
Busy man.
I was a very busy man. And it really wasn't that. Like, it was around the time I became like a pretty frequent, I used opiates and benzodiazepines like all throughout high school, like was very much like, dependent on those substances all throughout high school. And then, as I said, I went into an IOP, an outpatient treatment, when I was 18, and then just struggled in the years between after that kind of like first experience with recovery. And between, those years, managed to get 3 DUIs, managed to go to treatment a few times, managed to I went out to like Michigan. I told myself that like Connecticut was the problem. I spent some time in Massachusetts at a sober house and like started to experience like what 12-step recovery was actually like. And then even after that, had a relapse, was forced to leave the sober house, was living in my car in Dorchester, Massachusetts. That became like very, very chaotic. And I managed to, like, I would always do these things where I would like blow my life up, you know what I mean? And I'd be like, oh my God, you did it again. You just like blew your life up. And I would get in trouble again. And the last time that I got in trouble with like the subsequent 3rd DUI, I knew that like I was very likely going to jail and that I, like couldn't imagine my life with drugs anymore, and I couldn't imagine my life without drugs. And that was like an extremely scary, unknown place to be. And I think the thing that I think about most when I decided to like actually do the things that had been suggested to me for many years at that point, it was, I thought to myself when the first moment that I knew like, oh, I'm probably going to jail, I thought that I at least I'll have people to talk to in jail. That was like the first thought, and I used to say that and like cry because like,
that makes me sad.
yeah, because like I just would look out on the world of like, how are all these other people normal? How are they able to function? And like I had no connection with other human beings. And then that was the first thought. It wasn't like, holy crap, I have to go to jail. It wasn't like, what's going to happen to me. It wasn't like super scared. All of those myriad of feelings like I had going on, but the main thing that hit the hardest was like, well, at least I'll have people to talk to there. And that like made me think about like how isolated I was, how alone I was, where that isolation and addiction and the stigma surrounding it and everything had brought me. And that was what made me say like, okay, like I should connect with people and I should try to get better. And I did those things, and it's been 8 years, over 8 years. It's wild to think about, but that's always something that I come back to when I think about, the moments of that.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me, 'cause especially like when you're using, I also am familiar with the beat of like going to a sober house and then being like, you gotta go. Like you gotta get out of here, you little rascal. Stop getting high here. And kind of that isolation, like that was, I think it's never about like the amount you're using or what you're doing. It's always like that emotional bottom that I think kind of brings people in, where it's like, I am so alone. Like I'm around people, but I'm living a lie. Like I'm keeping secrets from them, and I'm just like so shut off from the world and like othered, and I'm othering myself in a way. And that is like, yeah, that's a really lonely place to be in. That's a really scary spot to be in. And what was your relationship with your family like during all of this?
It was like very frayed and tattered, and like they were fearful, they were fearful of me. They were fearful of like losing me. They didn't know what to do, like how to save, they just were kind of grasping for straws, hoping that like I would do what they thought was the right thing. And it became like fewer and farther between as I, tried to do the geographical cure and go to Massachusetts. It's just like I wasn't living in the same state as them. And then, fast forwarding to like coming back here and catching the third DUI and all of those things, like it took a lot of, building that like connection back, building that rapport back. But I think that the thing that is the most important is like they were honestly, unfortunately, truly just like waiting for the call that so many other families that they knew and I knew and we all know at this point that like, they show up at your door at 4 a.m. with a social worker and a cop and maybe a priest.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a scary place to be in. And it's even, I had my sister say something similar to me about that, where she was in her college essay. She was like, I never wanted my sister to die, but sometimes I just wanted our family to be able to start healing. And I think a lot of people can judge themselves for feeling that way, because on paper that feels like, it's like that feels heavy and kind of shameful, where it's like, how could I wish that on someone? But it's also so natural to start feeling that way as like a protective measure. And so when you came back to Connecticut, did you go to treatment? Did you start going to meetings? Like what was it that built the momentum?
I started going to meetings, and then at about like 7 months sober, I had to go to jail for a year. But I did not, like I went and got on MAT, or medication for opioid use disorder, same thing. I got on Suboxone again, and for the 7 months like leading up to going to jail or prison or whatever you want to call it, I like tapered down and came off because I knew I would likely not be able to stay on it when I was incarcerated, and just went to meetings every day. They kept saying do 90 and 90 because it builds a habit and all of that. And I did, it was the first time that I started like taking commitments and like, working. I had worked with sponsors before, but I remember like when I was in Massachusetts, I would go to meetings and like young guys would like give me their number. You know what I mean? Like I would go to these meetings and they'd be like, hey man, I'm so-and-so, here's my number. Like shoot me a text. And I'd be like, why are these people so nice to me?
Yeah.
And then I would just never reach out.
Yeah.
Like I never like built the connection that I wanted. I would literally just like go to meetings, be there. That was like, my first bout of like doing step work and recovery in Massachusetts. It's just like, I would be there, I would go to meetings, like I didn't have that connection. And I think that connection is like so huge when we talk about like people and recovery and just addiction in general. And I never understood it. I was like, why are they so nice? And then when I started like this time around, like I actually understood that that's like us just helping each other and helping ourselves,
Yeah.
And building that connection. And so like started doing commitments. And I remember like the first time they gave me the key to a church to do like to do the coffee commitments. Like I was like, yo, you don't know me. Like I would literally rob this place blind. Like, and I cried. I remember crying because like somebody just gave me a key and the opportunity to make coffee, because that was how like disconnected I felt from like everything that was human. And then it was like, why would you do this?
Yeah, and drug use it is super dehumanizing. And I would assume, and I'd love to hear about this, I'm sure that some of that experience probably influenced the work you do now, because it's even like, it's so dehumanizing being an addict and having like the services, sometimes like the people that are supposed to help you not be able to see that, where it's like, I don't deserve to die. Like, I'm not just another number. I'm not a statistic. Like, a lot of times it's hard for people to see past just that identity and that label and like see that, I don't know, we do recover. That feels corny to say, but we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. It definitely feels corny to say it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think that like when you talk about the dehumanization of people who use drugs in general, and then people who are like considered having a substance use disorder or like quote unquote an addict, it like unfortunately has to do with just like decades, decades and decades and decades, over 100 years of just like bad policy inform and unfortunately like very racist and xenophobic policy
Oh, yeah.
that like has just become this like cultural norm that people don't even truly understand, that like that's the way that they react to a person who uses drugs. And the way that I try to frame it when I talk to people is that like, if you think about policy and you think about drug use, it's always been attached to like a moral or a value. And the moral and the value in the early days of drug policy, like the first drug policy, one of the first anti-drug ordinances in the United States was like 1875 for opium. And it stopped individuals, it didn't stop opium from being used. The goal was to stop white people from going into opium dens because there was fear of anti-racial socializing. And it's always tied to this concept, like a lot of bad drug policy and many of the early days of drug policy is tied to this concept of like white people being fearful of like the seduction or the rape of white women. And so if you think about that in terms of value and policy, values and morals, it's always like we're trying to protect children, we're trying to protect women. Like the things that we find like are the most innocent and like should not ever be corrupted. And it's very, very easy to attach like bad policy, bad ideas, and racism to a value because nobody's going to disagree with the fact that they want to protect women and children. No one.
And that's also, I mean, it's like with the racism aspect of it, that's like the war on drugs, which largely just targeted minority communities. I don't think it's a coincidence that came right after the civil rights movement, after MLK got assassinated. It was like 2 years later. They were like, now we're going to do this. Like, and we're just going to create generational trauma, incarceration, and learned helplessness. And then also, like, that entire I mean, I think a lot of drug policy can also be tied into kind of America's dislike and like of poor people essentially, and being like, well, it's your fault. And it's like,
It's
no,
your fault. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps.
Oh my God, yeah.
But the reality with the dehumanization of people who use drugs is that like we don't think about how that has like morphed and changed, but stayed relatively the same for the past 100 years. It's always attached to that moral, and so we've always attached like negative connotations with a person who uses drugs. And then in order to continue to effectuate these policies, we essentially just dehumanize people, and it's gotten to the point where it is so ingrained into all of our systems, into hospital systems, medical industrial complex, prison industrial complex, all of it, that we don't even really notice it's there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's so many inequities. Like, none of the social services in place are usually equitable, like all of those systems. I did a big project on this recently. I can't think about school right now, but this is like everything. Well, that's the problem with going to school for like social services and stuff. I'm like, I'm just more angry than I was before.
Yeah.
But it's good because then when I'm around like relatives that are like, oh, poor people, I'm like, let's sit down because I'm about to ruin your day. But so being in this place that you're in, there are plenty of people who work in this field and also enter this field from a place of dysfunction, coming from like their own addiction, but they don't have the take that you have, and they're not like fighting in this way. Like, how did you get into this specific aspect of the field?
I think that if I can tie it to anything, it's that I'd always tie it back to that feeling that I felt where it was like, well, at least I'll have people to talk to in jail, right? That complete lack of connection that I had, the disconnection from like anything human. And that's why like the work of harm reduction speaks to me so specifically, because the concept is very simple. It's not that mind-blowing. That, you know, we treat all people with dignity and compassion and respect, regardless of whatever decisions they're making. And you build rapport and you build relationships and you just show up and hold space for another human being without your conditions. So compassion without conditions. You know, whatever I have going on internally for me, that's about me. It's not about the person that's in front of me. Most people, you know, even in the worst spaces of struggle, still are, all people, even in the worst spaces of struggle, still are the experts in their own lives. And we have to, you know, allow that to be a reality and not have it be us. Saying that we're the expert in your life. I don't know what the person in front of me has gone through.
Totally letting them retain autonomy. Because that can be so quick to discount where it's like, oh, you think this is going to work for you, but I think this is going to work for you. So do this, this, and this, and not letting them, like it's client-centered care too, right? Like letting them still take lead. And yeah, like you said, harm reduction, it's not that mind-blowing, but for some, it's still hard to stomach for a lot of people, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of the different arguments. Like I've heard like safe injection sites. I've heard some of the opposition to that has been like, it'll convince more people to do heroin or to use needles. And I'm like, no one that like that always blows my mind too, because I'm like, no one is going to be like, you know what, now that I can do this supervised, this has been the one barrier that's been stopping me from like injecting drugs. Yeah, what are some of the arguments you hear against it?
I mean, I've heard everything from, you know, like I worked very closely with the Waterbury Police Department doing overdose response. I've worked with different like overdose response pilots and harm reduction programs basically since like I started doing this work. And I've heard everything from like, you know, I think they should just be stepped over, to, you know, if you're giving out a syringe, you're condoning substance use. If you have overdose prevention centers or safe consumption spaces, that, you know, you're enabling the behavior. It's always about enabling the behavior. It comes down to that. And I think, again, that comes back to how we've been cultured around substance use, even within the abstinent space. Like I am a person who is abstinent. It works for me. But the reality is that 90% of people who use drugs do not have a problem with drugs. And we are the anomaly. Like myself, other people that are, you know, people who have substance use disorders, et cetera, like we're the anomaly. We do not make up the majority of it, but our experience is the thing that puts definition to anyone and everyone who uses drugs. And it's also the thing that like identifies worth, you know, like because we have such a specific view around substances, because it is such a dehumanized space, we also say that the only time that anyone should be able to receive care, dignity, compassion, respect is when they are abstinent. That is when they become a human being and not before. It is never before. And so with us being the anomaly, we don't get to decide the way that the system works. And so it's always back down to that concept of like enabling the behavior, because the only attainable measurement of success is complete abstinence, and anywhere in between is a complete failure, right? If you're completely abstinent, like myself, like attaboy, good job, you know, like the world is on your side. If you're a person who has reduced use or like trying to find that space in between, maybe they enter, you know, full abstinence recovery, maybe they don't. But if you're that person that's trying to find out what that looks like for you, you can't access housing, you can't access treatment, you can't access services that are going to benefit you. And that's because socially, I don't know that even most people know this, but socially, the only thing we have as a measurement of success is abstinence.
Yeah, and it's also like systems like that. Like I can think of an example of an alumni we've had here who he used IV meth for a long time until eventually his doctor was like, you have HIV now, like you need to change something. And through harm reduction programs, he's continued to use crystal meth, but he stopped shooting up. And that in itself is a crazy victory. And he was able to sustain like that for around 15 years. And eventually he saw abstinence, but he wasn't ready to try something like that. Like that kept him functioning and kept him still with us. It's like, I think that's also why we see a really high like suicide rate too. Because it's like, if you're backed into a corner, you're not allowed any services. And it's like, you have to do this something that for a lot of people feels very unattainable or at like an extreme end of the spectrum or nothing else.
Yeah, it is. It's one extreme or another. If, there's no space for people to access what the in-between looks like because they also can't access the services that allow them the stability, Yeah. And so they're just completely required to be at one end of the spectrum or the other. And society says, like, we don't care about you unless.
Yeah.
And so that's why the work of harm reduction speaks to me, because it's not about that. And it is about like social justice for people who use drugs, and that everyone deserves dignity, compassion, and respect. And I know that I didn't necessarily experience those things when I was, a person who used drugs, but you also look at me, I am from Cheshire, Connecticut. I'm a white person, my starting line was a lot higher than immense numbers of people in this country. And the system for many circumstances has been built for and by people like me, and so all of these structures that come into play are never viewed when we're talking about like that issue. It's a very complex issue, and there are no easy solutions for complex issues, but we like there to be, because it is the most reasonable thing. And so with that being said, like, all these systems have been built by and for people like me, and my starting line is way higher. Things worked out for me, but we don't talk about the structures that surround people's lives that use drugs and why things are the way they are. We simply just kind of have that idea of like, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, you've done this to yourself. You need to get yourself out of it. And never the structures that actually are built to keep people, in those spaces.
Yeah. And also we can look at a lot of people's lives too and see where social services have like, we can learn from that, like where social services can be bolstered. Because I've had a sponsee who, didn't stand a chance. As like a lot of these people that end up in the situation, like you said, they don't start in the same place. But with like group homes, CPS, like DCF, like all of these different protective factors that don't necessarily operate in a capacity that they need to be able to. And I mean, I can't even imagine working. I know someone that she started working at DCF and she had a heart attack like 2 months later because she was like, I mean, I can't. Yeah. But all these different social services that need to be bolstered. And so because you've lobbied for different services, correct? Like, what have those projects been that you've been working on?
So a few years ago, Senator Saud Anwar, he put up a bill for overdose prevention centers in the state of Connecticut. It was 2023, and he wanted, safe consumption spaces. He is, a physician. He's a doctor. He understands the reality of these spaces save lives. People do not die in them. They just allow a space for people to consume their drugs under supervision. They are illegal substances that are brought in from the outside. They can consume their drugs in that space. They can get connected to services, case management, take showers, really like allow it to be a space where people can come in and access services that is the lowest barrier and doesn't tell you, hey, we don't care about you because you're using drugs. So he put that bill up, and it has failed 2 times now. It failed in 2023 and in 2025, but not a complete failure. In 2023, when we were advocating for overdose prevention centers, what happened was the safe consumption piece was taken out of the bill, but it did proceed forward to open up the first harm reduction centers in the state under opioid settlement dollars, where people can come in and in some circumstances, depending on the community, like do laundry, get safer using supplies, access HIV, Hep C testing, all sorts of different, services that can be accessed by people who use drugs in a space where they can relax, not feel judged. They can, be there for a little bit, get supplies, have conversations, get connected to services, do drug checking services, all those kind of things. But the safe consumption piece was taken out. And then we did it again in 2025. And unfortunately, it was just removed from a much larger public health bill due to, worry on both sides about whether these spaces were, the correct idea. And again, heard all of those things that, it's a sanctioned drug den, it's all of these things. But, I visited them. They're underwhelming.
Yeah.
They're extremely underwhelming. Like, people have these concept of like safe use sites and it's just a bunch of tables and people go and sit at the tables, and there's usually a center bubble, and a nurse or someone just looks around the room and makes sure that no one is, experiencing an overdose. And if they do, they have oxygen, they have naloxone, they have the things to give them. The true reality of these centers is they're like the lowest barrier of service for people to access so many different things, from housing supports to treatment supports. I work with Liz Evans in Bridgeport, who works for Liberation and is the senior manager of harm reduction, and she was one of the folks that helped to open Insight in Vancouver, which was the first ever North American safe injection site in Vancouver.
I've heard about that.
So we have been pushing for these centers in Connecticut. Unfortunately, there's a lot more community buy-in that needs to happen. We need people to understand, what they are. And we also need, normal people to understand that, we need normal people to understand that, like, people who use drugs deserve to live. Like, once we can get there, then we can do all of the other work. But I don't know if we're even there yet, which is sad.
Yeah, there's definitely a certain callousness that it feels like there's a long way to go to dispel that. Because I'm sure you were probably familiar with the mass overdose that happened on the New Haven Green. I was first getting sober. I was volunteering at the soup kitchen. I walked by the green and I was like, oh my God. And it was so horrifying. And immediately I was like, gave me flashbacks to my own life. But people were referring to that as like a junkie genocide. Like, it seemed like everything had been dosed in a way to make it lethal. But the callousness that I saw on like Facebook in the community towards that, about like this massive loss of life. Like, there was so many people that passed away, so many people that overdosed in this one event, and people being like better off without them.
Yeah, we helped to work on, because I believe that was Major League K2.
It was, yeah, laced in with,
and we've helped to like create a drug checking program across 5 different sites in Connecticut that is built to address if something like that happens. We can have kind of like quick time response to actually identify like what the substances are for overdoses. And so that's one of the programs that I work very deeply in, is our drug checking program at Liberation. But yes, you're absolutely right. People are extremely callous to it, and I don't think they understand that the reason that callousness exists is because for decades, over 100 years, we've essentially been, using it as a way to other people. And this is the result, is that, we have to do so much community education to teach people that no matter what they're going through, their voice matters, their life matters, and their, family members, brothers, sisters, cousins.
And I think America, we very much operate under the guise of Eastern ethics. That's all very individualized. There's a large focus on expansionism, individualism, versus if we're looking at Western ethics, there's a much larger community focus. And so it seems like there's a lot of that, in the same way with drug use, it's well, just don't use. Or with people who are in poverty, it's just get a job. Or people that are unhoused, it's just get a job. And it's they do have a job. A lot of the time they do have a job. Just kind of that attitude of, it's the American dream also, I feel we've all kind of been sold on, where it's the pick yourself up by the bootstraps, you can make anything of yourself, but it's the systems that are in place don't support that at all.
And we don't talk about the systems enough, It's always individualized. It's always, just as you said, it's one person's fault. We don't put any onus on the systems. We put all of the onus on the individual and what they're doing versus what they're not doing. And I think that that's also why I'm drawn to harm reduction so much, is that for the longest time, even as a person who is privileged, and even as a person, it felt like, because I was a person who used drugs, the system was, built against me, and it never really was, you know what I mean? But, and so truly trying to change those systems, I think is so important, because we do have the power, to do that, if it's something that we believe in and we want to actually see and effectuate change.
Yeah, I'm going to be jacked up about this all day. I can talk about this forever. One of the last questions, where do you want to be in 5 years? What projects are you working at, as corny as that is? I know no one likes that. Where do you see yourself? But what projects are you working on now? Where do you hope to see them through, in the next couple of years? What's the end goal? I say end goal very loosely. I know there's never any well, now we're done. This is fixed.
I would like to see in the next 5 years, the state of Connecticut sanction overdose prevention centers. I went and spoke at the legislative office building on Thursday, just as a discussion about loved ones lost and who they were and what they liked and what they loved, and every single one of those lives is a story and just a huge loss for family members and friends, and they're overdoses. Fatal overdoses are preventable. They are not a requirement. No one needs to die. So I would like to see Connecticut, us, continue to push with the statewide harm reduction partnership, and, and our legislators to push for overdose prevention centers in Connecticut. I would like to see those spaces open. It's hard to say where I would like to be in 5 years. I think that, I hope that the work I do and, discussions that I have with people, either at the individual level or at the higher level, have enough impact that people do understand that abstinence is not the only thing that matters in order for a person to have worth. I hope that it changes hearts and minds as far as, what is seen as services that are meaningful, because I think that right now there is such an emphasis placed on services that help people access and continue to engage in abstinent-based recovery. That's the only thing that we find value in, and I hope that starts to shift, and we can look at this as is a much more nuanced problem.
And the work you do with liberation and just, I mean, all of this work is incredibly important. And we talked about this before, but I wanted to shout out Beverly, the PA at Liberation Programs. Vivitrol study is one of the people that I love the most in this world I still get to spend time with and keep very close to me. I'll start crying if I think about it too much.
Beverly is the best.
Yeah, it really is. It's been, because also Vivitrol is so hard to access for a lot of people. And so having a study like that was like groundbreaking in a lot of ways.
I think that a lot of the work that we're doing with Liberation is extremely groundbreaking. We've been working on creating a managed alcohol program, as well as, we're about to open up the Bridgeport Harm Reduction Center over the next year or so. It's truly work that is meant to change systems and show up in that way that we really need to, because when we can remove all of that, like social context in which we care about people who use drugs, that is where the healing actually begins. But until we can do that, we'll just be left in this space of, arguing with each other about like what's meaningful versus what's not meaningful and who's doing the best work. And like, it doesn't matter, if we can heal that, like then we can collectively grow and like support communities. If we can't heal that, then we can just, keep being at odds with each other.
Yeah. And is there a way people can follow the work you do, get involved in some way? Like where can people?
They can follow not that we have a ton of content, but they can follow the Statewide Harm Reduction Partnership on Instagram. It's sharp.ct or at sharp.ct.
That's a fun handle.
Yeah, Statewide Harm Reduction Partnership.
Yeah.
I like the acronym.
Yeah. Me too.
And then they can, look into any of the work that Senator Anwar is doing when we are pushing for overdose prevention centers in the state of Connecticut. They can, follow me on LinkedIn or look into all sorts of different services like Safe Spot, which is the overdose prevention hotline. I can leave information to get in contact with me at all if folks want to be involved in the Statewide Harm Reduction Partnership or any of that type of work, because I think it's immensely beneficial if it means something to you as it does to me.
Sweet. Well, I really enjoyed having you here. I'm glad that we've been going back and forth for like 3 months. So I'm glad that this worked out, and it was actually very enjoyable and super insightful. So thank you for coming out.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful.
Yeah. All right. Sweet. TTYL.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, Mountainside can help. Call 860-365-6764 to speak with our caring treatment team.